Amarachi had been counting Marcello Greco's silences for 11 months now, the way other people counted footsteps or heartbeats. She knew the difference between the silence that meant a deal had gone well and the silence that meant somebody wouldn't be showing up to work tomorrow or anywhere else ever again. She'd learned not to ask which one it was. In this house, not asking was how you stayed useful, but she'd never once seen him the way she was about to see him tonight. The knock came at exactly 2 a.m. Not the clipped, efficient rap he used when he needed something from the kitchen, but something uneven, almost stumbling like a man forgetting how his own hand worked. Amarachi's pulse spiked before her mind caught up. Marcello Greco did not come to the staff wing, ever. So why was the most feared man in the city standing outside her door? She opened it, and for a moment she couldn't breathe. Marcello stood in the hallway with his jacket gone and his composure gone with it. One hand pressed against the wall, as though it were the only thing keeping him upright. His white shirt was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and there was a dark stain soaked into the cuff of his sleeve. Amarachi stared at it. Blood. She didn't know whose. And after 11 months of learning exactly when not to ask questions, she knew better than to ask now. But one thought wouldn't leave her mind. Whose blood was it? Mr. Greco? Her voice betrayed her, cracking on the second word. What happened to you? He didn't answer the question she asked. Instead, he asked one of his own. Do you know what it's like, he said, his words dragging at the edges, to have people fear you so completely that not one of them would tell you the truth if it saved your life? His gaze dropped to the stain on his cuff. For a second, he looked almost surprised to see it there. Then his eyes found hers. I can't do this anymore. Amarachi's chest tightened. In 11 months, she had never once heard Marcello Greco admit weakness. Not to his men. Not to his enemies. She suspected not even to himself. So what had happened tonight that finally cracked open the man everyone else was terrified to challenge? And more urgently, why had he walked past every locked door in that estate, past every guard sworn to die for him, and knocked on hers? She didn't know. But Marcello wasn't standing there because he'd chosen the easiest door. He had chosen her. Come inside, she said, pulling the door wider before she could think better of it. Before someone sees you like this. He didn't move. Not at first. He simply stared at her like a man trying to remember how trust worked, like he'd forgotten the shape of it. Then, from somewhere deep inside the mansion, came a sound hell. Bang. Amarachi flinched. Another sound followed. Bang. Her eyes moved toward the hallway. Marcello's entire expression changed. The broken man disappeared. The Mafia boss was back. His voice dropped to a whisper. Lock the door. Her stomach turned cold. Why? He looked toward the darkness behind him, then back at her. Because someone knows where I am. Amarachi's fingers tightened around the door. Someone knew. Someone had followed him. And suddenly she understood why the most powerful man in the city had come to the one place nobody would think to look. Her room. His eyes met hers again. Amarachi. It was the first time he'd ever said her name like that. Not like an employee. Not like a maid. Like she was the last person standing between him and something terrible. Whatever happens tonight, he whispered, don't trust anyone in this house. Her heart began pounding. She should have closed the door. She should have called the guards. She should have walked away while she still could. Instead, she stepped aside. And when Marcello Greco crossed the threshold, Amarachi had no idea she had just opened her door to the one secret his entire empire would kill to keep hidden. She only knew one thing for certain. He had come to her. Out of everyone, he had come to her. And before the night was over, she would learn exactly why. Welcome to Roses and Revolvers, where no one leaves untouched. If this story had your heart racing, you already know you can't stop here. Subscribe now, because the next confession, it's darker, and you won't want to hear about it from someone else. Drop your location in the comments. I want to know who's brave enough to stay. Morning arrived before Marcello was ready for it. Sunlight slicing through the curtains he didn't remember closing, and for one disoriented second he didn't know whose ceiling he was staring at. Then the memory hit him like a fist, the knock, the confession, the way he'd said times, "You're the only one who's ever just talked to me." Times like his chest had been cracked open, and he hadn't noticed until the words were already out. He sat up so fast his head spun. What exactly had he told her last night, and how much of it could he still take back? He found her in the kitchen, moving through her routine like nothing had happened, and something about that steadiness unsettled him more than panic would have. About last night. He started and stopped. He'd negotiated with men who held guns to his head. He had no idea how to finish that sentence. Amarachi didn't look up from the stove. You needed somewhere to be. I gave you somewhere to be. Simple. Final. Like she was closing a door he hadn't realized was still open. But it wasn't that simple, and they both knew it. He caught her glancing at him twice before she caught herself. She caught him doing the same. By midday, the staff had noticed his newfound habit of finding reasons to walk past the kitchen. Whispers moved faster than footsteps in that house. And somewhere down the hall, a phone was already ringing a call that would reach his underboss within the hour, carrying 4 words that would put a target on a maid who'd only ever offered him a glass of water. The boss went soft. It became a pattern neither of them named out loud. Marcello would finish his last meeting of the evening voice, still carrying the flat, dangerous calm his men had learned to fear, and somehow, without deciding to, I find himself in the kitchen doorway 10 minutes later, jacket gone, tie loosened, watching Amarachi work like her hands moving through flour and steam were the only honest thing left in his day. Why did 30 minutes in this room undo what 3 hours of business couldn't touch? You're doing it again, she said one night, not turning around. Doing what? Standing there like you're not sure you're allowed in. He almost laughed, the first real one in longer than he could remember. Am I? Depends if you're going to just stand there or actually make yourself useful. She slid a knife and a cutting board toward him without waiting for an answer, and something about the ease of it, the ordinariness of it, hit him harder than any threat he'd faced that week. When was the last time someone had asked something of him that wasn't about power? They didn't talk about the men who ran his empire, or the money, or the blood that occasionally found its way onto his cuffs. They talked about nothing burnt garlic, her grandmother's recipes, the particular stubbornness of a kitchen window that never latched right, and somehow nothing had started to feel like everything. But peace like that didn't last in a house like his, because 2 floors up, his underboss was already watching the pattern too, counting the minutes, building a file, waiting for the exact moment this fragile warmth would become useful as a weapon. The whispers reached Marcello the way whispers always did in his world sideways, disguised as something else, dressed up in the language of loyalty. It was Dante who brought them, his underboss for 9 years, the one man who'd never once needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. He didn't knock before entering the study. He never had to. You've been spending time in the kitchens, Dante said, not a question. Marcello didn't look up from the papers on his desk. I eat. Strange habit, I know. You eat standing next to the maid for 40 minutes at a time. Dante's voice stayed level, almost gentle, which was somehow worse than anger. People are talking, Marcello, not the staff. The families. Word travels faster than you'd like to believe. Something cold moved through Marcello's chest. What exactly were they saying? And more dangerous still, how long had they been watching before he'd even noticed? There's nothing to talk about. Then why does it feel like you're convincing yourself of that more than me? Dante finally sat, unhurried, the way a man sits when he already knows he's won the point. You built this empire on being untouchable, unreadable. The moment they think they've found a weakness, a woman, a maid, they will use her to get to you. Not because they hate her, because they don't care about her at all. Marcello's jaw tightened. He wanted to argue. He wanted to say Amarachi was nothing, meant nothing, that 30 minutes in a kitchen didn't rewrite 14 years of careful isolation. He said nothing at all. And that silence, the first time in years Dante had seen him fail to deny something, told his underboss everything he needed to know. Don't forget to hit like, leave a comment, and subscribe for more. The kitchen doorway stayed empty that night. And the next. By the third evening, Amarachi found herself glancing at the clock, then hating herself for glancing at the clock, then wondering why a man's absence had any right to sit in her chest like a stone. Where had he gone? And why did the silence feel less like relief and more like a warning? She saw him twice that week, both times in passing, once in a hallway, where he looked through her like she was made of glass, once at the top of the stairs, where he paused for exactly 1 second too long before continuing on without a word. The old Marcello had returned, the one she'd only heard about before that first knock. Composed, distant, untouchable. Did I do something wrong? She finally asked, cornering him near his study, unable to hold the question in any longer. His eyes flickered, something honest breaking through before he caught it and locked it away again. No. Then why? It's better this way. His voice was flat, final, the voice he used on men who disappointed him. For both of us. She wanted to argue. She wanted to remind him of flour on his hands and laughter that had surprised even him. Instead, she watched him retreat into his study and close the door with a quiet, deliberate click that felt louder than any slam. What she didn't know, what he was carefully making sure she'd never know, was the conversation with Dante still echoing in his skull, and the growing certainty that the only way to keep her safe was to make her believe he'd never wanted her at all. He was wrong, and it was about to cost them both more than either of them understood yet. 3 weeks of silence broke the night Amarachi walked into his study without knocking. Marcello looked up, startled, and something in his face shifted before he could stop at relief, quickly buried under irritation he didn't feel. "You shouldn't be in here. I don't care." Her voice shook, but she didn't move. "You've spent 3 weeks looking at me like I'm a stranger. I want to know why." Amarachi. "No." The word cracked through the room like something breaking. "You don't get to shut a door in my face and call it nothing. Not after everything. So tell me the truth, or I walk out and I don't come back." Silence stretched between them, thick enough to drown in. What was he more afraid of, telling her or losing her? "I pushed you away to protect you," he finally said, the words dragging out of him like something physical. "Dante warned me. My enemies are already circling, looking for anything they can use against me, and you'd become exactly that. A weakness. A target. I told myself distance would keep you safe. And did it?" Her eyes burned into his. "Because all it did was make me feel like the 2 weeks before meant nothing. They meant everything." He was standing now, closer than either of them expected. His composure, that famous ironclad composure, finally completely gone. "That's the problem, Amarachi. You meant everything. And I don't know how to protect something that matters this much without destroying it in the process." The air between them went electric, unbearable, honest. And for the first time since the night he'd knocked on her door, neither of them looked away. The call came at dawn, and Marcello knew from the first word that everything had changed. One of his men, voice tight with something between fear and disbelief, told him what the surveillance had finally caught Dante, on a private line, promising a rival family that the transition would be smooth once the current leadership problem was handled. Handled. As if Marcello were a spreadsheet error to be corrected. He sat with the recording for a long time, replaying his underboss's voice, the same voice that had warned him about weakness, about Amarachi, about the dangers of trusting the wrong person. 9 years of counsel, and every warning had been misdirection. How long had Dante been building this? And how much of what Marcello believed about his own empire had actually been Dante's design all along? The rumors about Amarachi, the pressure to isolate himself, the careful, patient campaign to make Marcello more paranoid, more alone, more dependent on the one advisor feeding him poison disguised as loyalty. It hadn't been protection at all. It had been a slow, deliberate siege. He didn't raise his voice when he called the meeting. He didn't need to. Dante realized it the moment he saw the men positioned at every exit, the moment he saw Marcello's face not cold, not composed, but lit with something far more dangerous. Certainty. "You should have just asked me for the empire," Marcello said quietly. "Instead of trying to take it by turning me against the only person who ever made me want to keep it." By the time the sun fully rose, the whispers had gone silent permanently. And for the first time in 14 years, Marcello Greco walked back into his own house, not as a man defending his throne, but as one finally free to choose what came next. He found her in the kitchen, exactly where he'd first learned to breathe again, and for a moment he just watched her from the doorway, the way he had that very first night, except everything about him had changed since then. No jacket left rumpled from panic. No blood on his cuffs. Just a man who had finally stopped running from the one room in his own house that had ever felt like home. "It's over," he said. "Dante, the rumors, all of it." Amarachi set down the knife slowly, searching his face for the catch, the condition, the but. There was always a but with men like him. "And what happens now?" "Now I ask you something I should have asked from the beginning, instead of trying to protect you by disappearing." He crossed the kitchen, closing the distance that had nearly cost them everything. "Not as someone who works for me. Not as someone I need to keep safe from a distance. As an equal, as the person I want beside me when I make every decision from here forward." His voice, steady in boardrooms and unshaken in violence, wavered on the next words. Build a life with me, Amarachi. A real one. No more hiding what this is. She searched his eyes one last time and found nothing guarded there at all. Years later, the estate ran differently. The silences Amarachi once counted like warnings had become something else entirely comfortable. Unafraid, shared. She stood beside Marcello, now not in the shadows of the staff wing but at the head of the table, an equal partner in every sense the word demanded, in a life neither of them had believed they were allowed to want. It had started with a knock at 2 a.m. and 4 words. Neither of them ever forgot. I can't do this anymore. Now, finally, he didn't have to.